Welcome to Lectionary Call-In for Tuesday, May 23rd of 2023, where two laypersons, a pastor, and an academician gather each week to discuss the Gospel Lectionary for the coming Sunday. Today we gather at 6:30 a.m. Eastern, and for our friend Charles Willett in Minnesota, he's not with us today, but we look forward to having him back. And our other friend who sits in the pastor's seat, Bill Hull, is traveling and looks forward to rejoining us in a few weeks. Of course, this gives us a great opportunity to make new friends and hear new perspectives, and that's why John Ryder's with us today. A little more about that in a moment. But for now, how do things work? Each week, we prepare independently for the Gospel Lectionary as we attempt to be faithful to Year A. We then receive some formative questions from the week's leader, and then in this podcast, we share, question, and challenge each other. And here are the folks joining us in today's discussion.
Sarah Mickelson from Tampa.
I am John Ryder from Valrico, Florida.
And I'm Don Upton, and I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina. John Ryder is a pastor at Palmyra Presbyterian Church that makes this podcast possible. And one of his roles is the Director of Adult Faith Formation. So, John, we're glad to have you today. And as Sarah and I always make sure, as the lay people on this call, that we want to be sure we have a seminarian, a pastor at our side as we work through the lectionary. And speaking of lectionary, I'm going to read the scripture for today, and then we'll dive into some key questions as we go forward. Today's lectionary, and it's the lectionary for the coming Sunday, the 28th of May, would be John 20, 19 through 23. That's John 20, 19 through 23, also known as the John Pentecost. When it was evening on that day, the first day of the week, and the doors of the house where the disciples had met were locked for fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." And after he said this, he showed them his hands and his side, and then the disciples rejoiced when they saw the Lord. And Jesus said to them, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, so I send you." And when he had said this, he breathed on them and said to them, "Receive the Holy Spirit. If you forgive the sins of any, they are forgiven them. If you retain the sins of any, they are retained." And that's the word of the Lord. Well, today we've got three questions. I think I'll go through each of them just to set the stage because there's some interplay with those. The first is related to the opening words in this selection, and it's how does the first day of the week context of the passage impact your interpretation and its application? So part of the stage setting is the first day of the week. The second question is going to be related to considering locked doors or being behind locked doors as a prompt for some historical memories, perhaps an echo of the past in scriptures. And the third stays on the gospel of locked doors in terms of being a metaphor, something can be applied to our own lives. But back to the first question, this interesting stage setting. Sarah, I'll start with you. Heads up. How does the first day of the week context of the passage impact your interpretation and application?
Well, I think first day of the week is a metaphor as much as it's an actual calendar kind of setting. So for me, it seems like it's a signal of something new. The first day of the week, the first day of creation, I'm thinking of those moments where it was the inbreaking of light. So there's something new, something fresh, perhaps something unexpected. A new course, maybe a new direction, a new way of looking at what was the world in which we existed, and now it's so much more. And then perhaps it's a letting go of what came before and being willing to see things with new eyes. And I think that's a trickier wicket for a lot of us because we have all this historical, lack of better language, baggage, might be luggage, might be trunks of things that we have experientially learned, and it's difficult to let go of those things and be open to what God would have us see. So for me, it's an interesting setting, almost as if there's this potential doorway that we're in this place, and from here, everything is new, everything is good, everything is moving us toward a different reality.
Thanks. How about you, John?
I think, like Sarah, I kind of picked up on the metaphor part of it as well. But before getting into that, I mean, I think there's something to be said about the timeline of things, of this being the first day as well. I mean, this is literally the night. This is Easter night. This is Easter evening. The resurrection has happened that morning. And so we've got these disciples who are locked in this room out of fear. And I mean, if you think about what has happened the past few days, they're traumatized as well. So it's not just fear of authorities, but I mean, they've been through significant trauma, and they're terrified. But in the verses preceding this, we know that they're actually aware of the resurrection. Mary Magdalene's been there, and it says that she ran to the disciples to tell them. And so, I kind of wonder a little bit about here at the first day of the week, this evening. They know about the resurrection. Did they not believe Mary? Why aren't they rejoicing? Why aren't they out looking for Jesus? Are they afraid of Jesus' judgment because they kind of all abandoned him at the cross? But so there's a lot of fear in that room. But we know the reality was the resurrection just happened that morning. And so, I am struck by the fact that this is not, days later or things like that. This is the evening of Resurrection Day as being the first day of the week. And so I think that's an important context to note just in terms of the timeline and the fact that even though they know the resurrection has happened, they're still huddled in fear. But in terms of kind of a metaphorical understanding of the first day, I kind of went with where Sarah was going to, a little bit of the new beginnings. So Jesus appears in their midst, says peace, breathes the Spirit upon them, and now it's kind of like, and then they rejoice, and now it's time to get to work. So it's the start of something new. It's the start of their ministry. And then I often think of, the first day of the week for us is we're looking ahead to what's coming in the work week. And so this passage also says to me, this, as we think about our faith journey and what lies ahead for us, that it begins with acceptance of the resurrection. It begins with receiving Christ's peace. It begins with receiving gifts of the Spirit to then get going. And so thinking about where in my life do I need to get going? Where in my life does Jesus need to appear and say, peace be with you, as the Father sent me, so I am sending you. And so those are some of my reflections on this first day piece.
Thank you. Sarah, I'm thinking about this as stage directions. The tendency when you're reading a play especially is to skip over what's usually in italics. A house on a hill with a porch, there's a power line, there's a bird. There's always, and I don't know about you, I got in the habit of skipping over that. And then as I matured, I read it very carefully because it matters. Where's this city? I think about on all the Gospels, there's the setting on a boat in a storm. Someone's asleep. Pay attention. And I think the author of John is saying when this launches, it does matter. I think there are folks going, why are we spending time on stage directions? I think, well, because John said so. And I picked two for the questions today. The one is, locked doors, and the other is weak. There's not much more there. They're all together. It's a room. Sometimes the simple things. Sarah, I know Act 2 of Waiting for Godot, they add one leaf to the tree. That's a big deal. The seasons have changed. All it takes is a leaf. So I'd say, let's pay attention because it's meant, I think, for us to reflect on what that might mean. Before we get into it, take a breath. A room, people, locked doors, first day of the week. If it were a play, you'd have to do some expedition, I think. Lock the doors and, what a way to start the week. You have to actually establish it. So as I went through it, reflecting on the first of the week, and I was surprised by the cosmic versus the mundane in this, because first day of the week is the first day of creation. I felt Genesis in this. So what are we creating here? In Genesis, I know the story. I know all the steps of the creation, and I know where the breath comes in. And we're waiting for another breath, I think. This is the John Pentecost with the breath, but there are other breaths all through the Gospels and the letters. So we're waiting for the breath. We're waiting in creation for the breath. So I like the big, but I'm really attracted to the small of this, which is a week has a shape even today. It's 2,000 years ago, but we know what a week is generally. A week is where you put things: context, worship, work, commerce, food, love, travel. It's got a shape to it, a human shape, the 7 days. It's got the 7 days of creation, but also, I don't know about you folks, I do begin the week thinking in 7-day periods. That's the way we work. So I think we're meant to understand this, and this one was more like a cliff. The 7 days aren't the same looking forward, because if they stay in the room, which apparently they're encouraged not to, they're even waiting in the wrong place, not here, go to Jerusalem, go to the temple, depending on what reading you're making. They're in the wrong place. So I love the mundane. It's got a shape. The work of the Christ and the Spirit is domestic. It's related to the daily business and commerce, taking care of each other, and where people worship, and where they seek God, and the going out. It's all mundane and very simple and very accessible, as long as they get out of there, which is what the second question goes to as well. So John, heads up. I'm going to send the next question your way. So in 2008, Bill Wallace, who taught lectionary class at Palmacia Presbyterian Church, a beloved teacher, just taught generations of people about lectionary. He challenged the class at PCPC to consider locked doors, or behind locked doors. I think he used to call it the gospel of locked doors, setting as a prompt for historical memory and perhaps an echo of the past in the scriptures. Does this reading prompt any historical or literature kind of memory for you, John? Let me go to you first, please.
Yeah, I think as I think about historical memory prompts, for me, the first one that comes to mind is the passage we're in, which is disciples in an upper room, doors locked and closed, huddled in fear. But if you were to just say locked doors in the Bible, this is the first one that comes to mind. As I do a little more reflection, I think about two things. One, the stone in front of the tomb that we've just had rolled away at the resurrection that morning, or preceding this passage, and I think about that being moved to let forth something new come out into the world. The resurrection, and that stone had to be moved in order for the resurrection to be brought into the world. But I also kind of go back to the motivations. Like, if there's a locked door, there's a reason we lock doors, and it's fear, from almost always. We do have some references in Scripture of prison doors being locked, and usually that's Paul in prison writing a letter. But for me, I think of the motivation. We lock a door because we're afraid of what's on the outside. We want to protect what's inside. We don't want it to be stolen or harmed. So it's out of fear. And so the historical memories that prompted for me were not so much about physically locked doors, but that notion of fear. And we've got, the Bible's riddled with places where people are afraid of something, and then they're comforted. And so in this moment, Jesus appears amongst them and says peace, and brings peace to them. But we also have, I think of, at Advent, we've got, angels saying, "Be not afraid," comforting shepherds. We've got lots of places where people are afraid, and God, whether it's through angels or whether it's through prophets or whomever, is bringing a word of comfort and peace. And so that was kind of the historical memory that it brought to me, was this idea of how often we are afraid, and it takes the work of the Spirit, takes the work of God to kind of, it's going to be okay, and comfort us.
What about you, Sarah? What do you think?
I'm thinking about the walls of Jericho.
Mm.
I'm thinking about Noah's Ark. I'm thinking about places where things were closed with intention, for some of the same reasons that John mentioned. For the safety of those who are inside. I made a note that I thought about the conversations that happen in those places where we have worked hard to make them safe. It could be the counselor's office. It could be the office of the minister. It could be the car rides home from school. It's those places where doors are locked for safety, and it gives permission or yields space to those places where hearts are opened and healed. These are very treasured, intimate conversations in my memory, and they're things that I turn over on a regular basis and look at and listen to again in my head. So I see this as an interesting fulcrum moment of lack of language here, where what's about to occur only occurs because of what happens here. And so for me, it's this wonderful opportunity to connect those dots to things that have happened in my personal life, things that have happened in my family life, things that have happened within the community of people I've grown up with, and even the people that are new that I'm meeting for the first time. So I think about those kinds of situational conditions that permit this kind of relationship conversation to occur. And so that's what it made me think of in the first reading of the language that we're given in this passage.
Thank you. In the question, and if you're facilitating a class or leading a discussion group today, it seems like just listening to our comments, you can swing it in a broad ways if you're doing historical, because you can actually find places where people are locked in or walled in, to your point, or in an ark, or I would add Lazarus. The story is echoing here. They're locked doors. And then in other ways, the idea, the life of the mind, the freedom to come and go, or the sheep and the keep, and the sheep coming and going inside of the story of the Good Shepherd. And I think, maybe asking it a couple different dimensions might help the group that's discussing it. I think all through scriptures, when we come up with these histories, in many cases, people are not locked in, though we have disciples in the letters, followers of Christ, who are going to be locked in prison from time to time as they sing hymns and praise. They're going to be locked out of the world in many ways, but they chose to lock the door too. I think that's important here. Is they lock the doors. They imprison themselves. They set their own doors. They choose to go dark. Today's language would be, off the grid, going dark, going quiet, safe house, me time. So I think come up with some analogies about what it means to go off the grid. But in this case, they choose, and they choose in ways that may not be connected to reality at all. Christ comes in and says, the whole stage setting is wrong. I love it as a stage setting because it says, a room, first of the week, doors are locked, and then the first thing you learn is, nope, not. So the convention is completely broken. Locked, but not locked. You can't lock your door. There's a little theme running through, and it goes, you cannot lock the door. You cannot throw a key, and you cannot get off the grid. It is not possible. The world is at your feet. Now, you happen to be waiting in the wrong place as you're doing that. So I think the tomb, John, I'm with you on that. I think Lazarus is out there. And Sarah, you mentioned the ark, and I was on that as well. And as they prepare, as they go into another period of waiting, let me pull out the NIV of Genesis 8, 6 through 12. Check this out as a room, isolation, walls, and what's to come in the days ahead, in the week ahead. After 40 days, Noah opened the window, he made an ark, and sent out a raven. It kept flying back and forth until the water had dried up from the earth. I'll pause. Hopeless, right? Hopeless. Nothing outside. Just fear. Death. The depths. Then he sent out a dove to see if the water had receded from the surface of the ground, but the dove could find nowhere to perch because there was water all over the surface of the earth, so it returned to Noah in the ark. He reached out his hand and took the dove and brought it back himself into the ark. He waited 7 more days, a week, again sent out the dove from the ark. When the dove returned to him in the evening, there was in its beak was a freshly plucked olive leaf, ! Then Noah knew that the water had receded from the earth, and he waited 7 more days and sent out the dove again, but this time it did not return to him. I mean, I get all kinds of cool annotations after it did not return to him, because the world's out there, life's out there, there's food out there, there are people out there as we go forward. Well, let's elaborate on that second question, which was more about what's in the gospel literature to, is the gospel of locked doors a metaphor for our own lives? Sarah, could you pick up on that one, please?
Okay. This is where all the writing went this week for me. I'm thinking about John Ryder's conversation prior to turning on the recording, and he also alluded to the idea that there's a lot here. So mine are a list of questions because that's how my brain works. What joy have I withheld from myself, as if I locked myself away, judging myself to be unworthy? What have I withheld from others who have failed to meet my standards of worthiness? Now, you don't get to know my secret because you're not trustworthy. Who have I kept myself from loving, locking them away from inclusion, from welcome, or from honor? What have I withheld from God, thinking that I would be deemed unworthy of the presence? And you can obey and earn your way into God's heaven. No, you can't. It's all grace. Jesus just shows up, like in this moment, walks in, offers peace, healing, and grace. And I love that in our human capacity, like in the Garden of Eden, we hide from God. And Jesus just, there's not a locked door or a wall or a moment that Jesus cannot be in. Or I should say, Jesus is not in. So that almost in every conversation, there he is, there they are. So it becomes this awareness of the Spirit being within the room, within the moment, within the conversation, within the relationship. And that brings a whole new layer, if you will, a dimension into the story. And I'm moving from a 2D world into a 3D world, and perhaps even 4. But the idea being that it's beyond my understanding, and that I think I'm locked away, and I am not. So I love this. I love this whole question, and it could go on and on and on.
Thank you. I'll take the next shot at it, and John, that gives you a chance to sum it all up for us. So
very good.
I like this question because it helps me focus on what the followers of Christ are being asked to do and today. And there are some differences. You know, Christ is focused on the followers of the time. So how does this connect today? I want to go back to they locked the doors themselves. Nobody did that. They were not in prison. There is no guard at that door except the life of their own minds. No guard. No commandant. no. I mean, as a matter of fact, they're no other prisoners. I view them as prisoners of their own minds and hearts. Don't blame them. John pointed out the trauma. Don't blame them a bit. The fear is general, abstract. I think at least that's the way I put it there, and it's meaningless. The gospel of locked doors actually is stage direction's wrong. The doors are not locked. Jesus comes and goes. He is the God of coming and going. I'm coming to you and I'm going. I'm coming and going. Sheep are in the keep. Sheep are outside of the keep, coming and going. So I'm wondering, in a way, it makes me think of banned books. In this case, these are banned people. It's like I'm not going to put myself on the shelf. If they'd stayed in that room, lived and died by coming and going into a private place where they're off the grid, I wouldn't know this room. It wouldn't exist in history. They had to leave for me to even know the room was locked. If they had not left, and if they had not told the story so that someone that we know as John put it down, I would not know there. It would be dead end. So just the fact that we're talking about the stage directions for something 2,000 years ago says there's life, and life was outside the doors. I'm also wondering, are these banned people that view that they're not valuable in the world, just like you'd say a banned book should not be outside the doors? I was thinking about that. And then I was thinking there was the church in that room, but it's not. The church only exists because they walk out of the door. I don't think the church exists in that room. The whole point of Jesus walking into the room and saying there are no locked doors is this ain't living. This ain't living. This ain't gospel. This ain't love. This ain't service. This ain't spirit. You have to go. And so we catch it today on this podcast and for months to come as people listen in. We're here talking about it because they left. They chose to leave. Christ got them out of that room. So there's a real outbreaking instead of inbreaking. Christ inbreaks and then it has to go out. So, but for the doors being blown open, there would be no church because they could have stayed. And I think we choose to come and go ourselves. And these are hard decisions sometimes when fear is in our lives. I'm not diminishing the fear. The tendency to lock down is there. And that's why we love each other and try to help each other and try to talk with each other. So I think that's it. Otherwise, what would have happened? It would have been the world of Christ still in the tomb, the world of memorials, behind closed doors, remembering the teacher, locked in time forever, in the tomb, what great times we had. And there's nothing in this discussion that has anything to do with, oh, weren't they wonderful times? Nothing like that at all. They had to go. My final note, John, before I come to you, is I can read this without mysticism. I think there's a practical thing here. Yes, Jesus appears and it is mystical and fantastic, but the message of walking out the door is pretty simple. They're thinking and moving with their feet and with love. The week ahead is domestic, home and hearth, commerce, business. They encounter people around the world who are getting on with their lives. And that's our world. We get on with our lives with the Spirit, and we help and we serve each other, and we feel the love as we move about. And, of course, things are about to really take off once they move out of the room. So I think this is anti-mystical. Touch me. Look, my hands, my feet. He's physical. This is about what we can do for each other, but they had to go. They had to go for us to be able to have this conversation today. Those are my thoughts. John, what about you?
Well, you mentioned fear, and I kind of hit that in the last question. I think that's, for me, that's the piece that really stands out. That there's a lot in our world that incites fear in us and those around us that we love. If we look at the news, it's one of the primary ways that our news is presented is things that we should be afraid of or things that we are afraid of, and it's the way that they use the hook is your refrigerator may be trying to kill you. Tune in tonight at 11 p.m. And so it's fear that motivates that. And we have this concept of people looking at their news and doom scrolling. It's just bad news after bad news. So I think there's a lot of fear in our world. Our politicians use it as motivation for fundraising and to draw people to their cause. We fear unknown. We fear economic security. and damage being done to our world. I think the biggest one for me with as someone with children in school is, we fear for our physical security in places that were once safe. And so every week that we hear of a school shooting or a shooting in the church or a doctor's office, there's a lot of fear, and it's just like the disciples gathered in that room. It's fear that's warranted. It's a scary and dangerous world. But I think if we let that fear drive us, then we just stay in that room with the door locked. I think we desire to have Christ come into our lives and say a word of peace and equip us and get us moving, as you were talking about, Don, moving out of that room. And I think there are some parallels here. This is John's Pentecost story. There's parallels to the Acts Pentecost story as we approach Pentecost Sunday, this coming Sunday, in that story, this mighty wind rushes in and kind of has a moment there. And while we don't see Jesus, kick in the door, in my mind, Jesus doesn't appear meekly. Jesus busts in there, it appears amongst them, and it's not a meek little thing. It busts into that reality to bring a word of peace. And they're terrified. They don't know what he's going to say or what's going to happen. And the first thing he says to them is, peace be with you. And that a lot of our churches share a moment of peace as they greet one another. And I think this passage for me is a reminder that that's not just a greeting of how are you doing this morning. That's sharing the peace of Christ to say everything is going to be okay. Ultimately in this scary world that we live in, God is in charge, and that is a wonderful thing. And so this reminder that God's peace triumphs over all and who's in charge, I think is a wonderful piece for me here. And it's something I think that we all desire, that there's no tomb that's going to constrain him. There's no doors that we can put up that are going to block him. There's no judgment in his encounter with us. It's just peace. And we're invited then to respond to that peace by carrying that peace out to others and to share God's love with others. I think, Sarah, I loved your questions, and I had a few questions that came to mind for me as well. And thinking about doors and the fears and the self-protection that we utilize those for. What doors of self-protection do I lock myself in? And then I also thought, how do we do that as a church? What doors in our churches are locked because of fear or a desire for self-protection? And maybe it's parts of our history that we don't talk about, or maybe it's our actual physical facility. Maybe it's elements of worship that are locked off that we want to protect a certain way. Maybe it's programs, but I just feel like there's a question there for our churches as well. Is there places where we're afraid of change or we're afraid of something happening that we just need to let the Holy Spirit, to let Christ bust in there and invite us to be at peace, to feel that breath of the Holy Spirit, and to be ignited for something new. And so that excites me as I think about other ways that we could kind of think about this. I love the parallels between this and the Acts passage, because ultimately the Spirit is disruptive in a positive way, and God, or Christ is disrupted in a positive way in this moment. It breaks up that huddle of fear. Lives are changed. Confusion and fear become purpose and power, and there's an exciting moment of what's next. So I really like putting these two passages next to one another.
Thank you, John. And thank you for being with us today. It's a pleasure to spend time with you. And for folks listening in, you're very likely to encounter the John and or the Acts through the week. And thank you for bringing those up, John. Palmacia Presbyterian Church, that makes this podcast possible, is at 3501 West San Jose. That's in Tampa, Florida. And for more information, you can go to palmacia.org. That's PALMACEIA.org. We always commend that site to you for great sermons. Sometimes John delivers a service there, so check him out. Outstanding music, meditations, prayers, discussions, agreements. So check that out. And you're always welcome, and we'll see you next time.